afternoon, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to apologize to you and the body for the hour-long delay, but I assure you we didn't spend the last hour just sitting around. Sometimes we're subject to the mercy of our photocopy equipment and other logistical things that we have to get in order for us to proceed with session. So at this time, I'm prepared to the agenda. Under second reading file, if the body agrees, the first bill will be Bill 427-30. Copies have been made available and put in the second reading file folder. And this is a bill introduced by T.C. Atta, Senator Atta. It's an act to appropriate $454,151 of the Guam Highway Fund to the Guam Regional Transit Authority for the purpose of carrying out its mandate. That would be the first bill that I'd like to move to place on the agenda.
On that motion, then, without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The second bill number is Bill 460-30, to which the sponsor, also Senator T.C. Atta, has requested that you waive the requirement of a public hearing, because as you know, this bill, the information and the genesis of Bill 460 was contained in a prior public law, but the subject matter was thoroughly vetted through a series of roundtable meetings that the sponsor had, and it's an act to ratify the adoption of the 2009 editions of the International Building Code, International Fire Code, and additional related construction codes as amended, and to provide for a task force to develop a new Guam Building Code Council. And I understand that you did provide a waiver of the public hearing requirement. And so that's my second motion.
Yes, and I go ahead and certify that today for the waiver. So the waiver then is granted, and on that motion then, without any objections, ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The next item on the agenda is Resolution 420-30, introduced by Vice Speaker Benjamin J.F. Cruz, and it's relative to expressing the 30th Guam Legislature support for the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to support House Resolution 1551, to support the rights of the indigenous Chamorro people of Guam, to request that the Obama administration sign the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to request that the Obama administration reconsider the military buildup. I move that this be placed on the second reading file.
On that motion, without any objections, ordered.
And the last item on the second reading file is Resolution 432-30, and it's also introduced by Vice Speaker BJF Cruz, and it's relative to expressing the Guam Legislature's objection to the satisfaction of the DOD's NHPA Section 106 responsibilities for the military relocation and other military buildup projects according to the terms of a draft programmatic agreement with Guam SHPO, and without further consultation with the people of Guam, and to further objecting to the proposed mitigation as inadequate. I move this to be placed in the second reading file.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Now for the approval of the agenda.
The other resolution for the FEIS.
That's just in motion. Oh, we have to introduce that. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're adopting the agenda now with those 4 items.
So on that motion, without any objections, so ordered. Thank you very much, Senator Respicio. So I would like to ask if Senator Guthridge, you can lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask my colleagues to join me in an ecumenical prayer. Dear Lord, we are assembled here today and tomorrow to consider public policies of great concern and interest to the people of Guam. As we deliberate and move towards consensus, we ask your guidance and your wisdom to help us make decisions that will benefit the entire island. We here today recognize the importance of your guidance and your wisdom, and we pledge to you our commitment to do what's right for all the people of Guam. Thank you, dear Lord. Amen.
And I ask Senator Palacios to lead us in the recitation of the Inifresi.
Inifresi gini ni mas kilo gihina sokko i mas kalom gi corazon hu gini mas figo na nina sinyahu u fresin mais sajo para bai hu protehi jan u defende I hinengi, I kultura, I linguaje, I aire, I hanum jan I tanu chamoro. Ni erin shokku diretso gine na zu stata este o hafidma gihilui Biblia jan I banderaho I banderan guahan.
And will Senator Ray Tenorio lead us in the Guam hymn and Senator Talataitigui in the national anthem.
Panongi tamoru uritanota kantan matunanya hitodu iluka para I honra para I gloria abiba I islansen para I honra para I gloria abiba I islansen para todo I tempo I paz para hita zangin langit na bendition Contrai peligro na fang safuham dus protehi island Guam. Contrai peligro na fang safuham dus protehi island Guam.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. Oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you very much. May I ask the clerk to take roll call.
Senator Tom Ada. Senator V. Ada. Senator Frank Blas. Senator Argun. Senator Calvo. Senator Cruz. Senator Espaldon. Senator Guthertz. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Taitigui. Senator Tenorio. Speaker Wampet.
Here, present.
Madam Speaker, wish to report there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio, you recognize for an approval of the Legislative Journal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Senators Uggan and Calvo be excused from session.
Without any objections, so ordered.
I move that we approve the Legislative Journal dated August 9, 2010 to August 20, 2010.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion, without objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are messages from Imagalahan Guahan, and I move the same.
On that motion, without objections, so ordered.
There are no reports of standing committees, and there are no reports of select committees. And so item 12, Madam Speaker, I move that bill number 452-30 to bill number 460-30, resolution 429-30 to resolution 437-30, and certificate number 212-30 be given its first reading.
On that motion, without any objection, so ordered.
Under motions, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my first motion is kind of bittersweet. We on August 28th, the Committee on Rules received a resignation letter from our Sergeant at Arms, Jolian Guerrero. Unfortunately, he had to resign his post. He had some personal family matters that he had to tend to. Things are going well, but his wife just needs additional treatment, and we ask that we keep her in her prayers. We ask that you keep the Sergeant at Arms, Jolian Guerrero, in our prayers as well as he undergoes his own medical issues. And so because we're in receipt of a resignation letter, it obviously makes the position become available for this body to decide on who the next Sergeant at Arms ought to be. On August 31st, the Committee on Rules adopted a rules resolution that names Mr. Tom Unshak as the acting Sergeant at Arms until such time the legislature in Guam, pursuant to section 22.01.01 of our standing rules, elects the attaché while we are in session, and that's where we're at today. So I want to move that the body appoint and elect Mr. Thomas J. Unshak to serve as our Sergeant at Arms for the 30th Guam Legislature. And at the same time, I wish to thank him and the entire central staff for doing what they can to help Mr. Leon Guerrero as he needed to take care of his business. So I offer that motion at this time, Madam Speaker.
So on that motion, Senator Tenorio.
Can we speak on the motion?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to also rise in support of the motion. I have known Mr. Unchiog for many years now, and he has done an exceptional job. I applaud the majority leader's motion because he has worked collaboratively, professionally, and he has done, I think, an outstanding job in serving every member of this legislature and all of the central staff's needs as an assistant to the Sergeant at Arms. And of course, my thoughts are also with the Mr. Guerrero with regards to his needs, and if there's anything that this body can do individually or collectively, we stand ready to provide for that. So I completely rise in support of the motion, and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Tenorio, for your kind words. So on the motion then, all those in favor of the appointment of Tom Unshak to serve as our Sergeant at Arms attaché, please raise your hands. Both hands are fine. Thank you. Tom, you are unanimously supported and by this body. So I'm going to ask Mr. Unshak if you can come to the front so we can swear you in. We want the whole world to know. Okay, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I solemnly swear
I solemnly swear
in the presence of Almighty God
in the presence of Almighty God
that I will well and faithfully support
that I will well and faithfully support
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the laws of the United States applicable to Guam,
the laws of the United States applicable to Guam,
and the laws of Guam,
and the laws of Guam,
and that I will
conscientiously
and impartially discharge my duties
as an attaché of as an attaché of
Iminatenta na Legislature Guahan.
Iminatrenta ni Legislature ng Guam.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Okay, Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I hope the Sergeant at Arms understands that we have to forego the merienda because you're a taskmaster. So just give him a congratulations and order him to get back to work. So there are no override attempts for this session. So my next motion, Madam Speaker, is that any resolution that's commendatory, congratulatory, or condolence in nature that's introduced for this session week, that they be automatically adopted, and that the clerk work with the sponsor and the legal counsel to make sure in the preparation of those resolutions or certificates, and that every single member of this legislature be co-sponsors of such efforts.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
And my next motion is the customary motion that if in the event we get to any one of the four items and the sponsor needs more time, that item does not lose its place in the second reading file. It's just set aside until such time the author signals you that they're ready for such discussion. But I make it every motion, every session, yeah.
So without any objections on that
Yeah,
motion?
notwithstanding, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, we're in the second reading file, and I recognize Senator Ada on bill number 427. $427.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 427 really is a simple, straightforward bill. The Guam,
Motion.
I move that Bill 427 be placed in the third reading, and I would like to discuss it.
Okay, you may proceed.
Madam Speaker, Bill 427 is a pretty straightforward bill. What it is, it's an act to appropriate $454,000 from the Guam Highway Fund. Now, this amount has actually been verified by the Director of the Bureau Budget that those funds are actually available. And the appropriation is to fund for the final month of operation for the Guam Regional Transit Authority for the month of September. And without this amount, without this appropriation, the Regional Transit Authority would not be able to pay for that final month's operations contract, and will then have to shut down bus services. These bus services, of course, are very important to those who depend on this mass transit service, because either that's their only means, they cannot afford an automobile, or are not able to drive. So very simply, I would urge my colleagues to support Bill 427 so that the mass transit will be able to operate during its final month of the fiscal year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. On the motion, are there any other speakers? Okay. So on the motion then to place 427 in the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Senator Ada, you're also recognized on bill number 460.
Madam Speaker, Bill 460, I move that Bill 460 be placed in the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, Bill 460 is actually introduced in response to Public Law 30-159, which was passed back in July of this year. And basically what Public Law 30-159 does is it established a new implementation date for the International Building Code. and it reaffirms that we will adopt the International Building Code of 2009 to replace the outdated Uniform Building Code. Public Law 30-59, 30-159 also required that a public forum be held in order to provide an opportunity for the community to come out and voice their concerns with the adoption and implementation of this new building code. And finally, for the Guam Fire Department and for the Department of Public Works to come back with its recommendations to the legislature as to what parts of the International Building Code should not be adopted. Now, first of all, I would like to just, there's been a number of questions to the point that have been asked regarding the International Building Code. First of all, why are we changing from the current code, the Uniform Building Code of 1997? Why are we now replacing that with this International Building Code of 2009? And the answer to that is that the Uniform Building Code, which we are currently using, was last updated in 1997. Since then, it hasn't gotten any updates. So if we were to stay with that building code, we really would be continuing to use an outdated building code. It's outdated from the standpoint that it does not incorporate the advances in the construction technology that have taken place over the last decade, the findings from engineering studies that were conducted on structures that have failed, and it does not incorporate the new the new advancements and developments in the construction industry in terms of materials that can be used for construction. So by maintaining the current code, we're really dealing with we could say, an inferior and an outdated code. So the Uniform Building Code was actually has been replaced by the International Building Code. And that International Building Code gets updated every 3 years. The other question that has been asked throughout the many, we've had approximately 4 working sessions plus 1 public forum. And at these working sessions and at the public forum, it was actually attended by many of your professional engineers and architects in our community. And these are engineers and architects who have been practicing in Guam for over 30, 40 years and have actually established their reputation as being credible engineers in our community. So they all participated in the working sessions and have given their inputs insofar as what parts of the building code we should not adopt or we should defer till a later time. In addition to that, all of these engineers have actually endorsed and advocate the adoption of the International Building Code. They think it's good for the community because what the new building code does is it enables the construction of safer buildings. It benefits our developers because in many cases they found that the standards that are called for in the International Building Code would actually result in less construction costs. For example, for the engineers, it's also beneficial to them because there are now software that's currently available which actually incorporates a lot of the parameters of the International Building Code, so they don't have to go guessing whether this is the factor you need to put in or what. They have also found that the reason why construction costs may be decreased in many cases is because they found that you don't necessarily make a building stronger by adding more cement to it, but instead they found that it's where you put that cement It's where you put the reinforcement materials that really matters, and not so much how many reinforcement materials that you actually use. There was the concern about that whether if we adopt, for example, this international building code, does that mean then that we're going to have to go back and retrofit every existing building in this community? Or at least that was the story that was being spread out there. That's what we're going to have to do, and that really is not the case. There is in the IBC itself, it does state very specifically that the building code, that existing buildings that were in existence prior to the adoption of the codes really do not have to change anything. But it does require, and also our current law, Guam law, requires that a building has to come into compliance if you're going to go and renovate it, and the renovation is going to entail a project that's greater than 50% of the value of the building. Then if you're going to go to that extent of renovation, then you have to bring the whole building into compliance. So there's actually thresholds as to when this thing will come in, but it does not automatically require us to go retrofit every building in the community. The one big controversy in adopting the International Building Code was that the International Building Code of 2009 required the installation of automatic fire sprinklers in 1 and 2 family dwellings, your single homes, and also in townhouses. Not all states have actually adopted the water sprinkler requirements. In fact, only 6 states have adopted the water sprinkler requirements, and all of them are to be effective January 2011 or later. There's 11 states who have actually removed or delayed action on sprinkler systems. So that particular provision, which is a new feature, which is the latest amendment to the International Building Code, is something that raised a lot of controversy in the community. And as it should, because first of all, in one of the working sessions, the chief engineer for Guam Water Works came in and he indicated, you know, if you put on the water sprinklers in the houses, GWA can't really guarantee that it's going to be able to provide the water pressure to be able to trigger those water sprinklers and have it work the way it should in case a fire breaks out. So what you're going to have then is, if we require this, people are going to be installing their fire sprinklers in their houses thinking that they're protected, when in fact the water infrastructure cannot support it. The other concern, of course, is that it will increase the cost of homes on Guam, which are already expensive to begin with. And by requiring the installation of these water sprinklers, is going to make homes a lot less affordable than it already is. So the bill, you'll find in section 9 of the bill, very explicitly says that automatic water sprinklers will be required in certain groups, occupancy groups, with the exception that it shall not apply to 1 and 2 family dwelling units, and it shall not apply to 1 and 2 story townhouses up to and including 15 dwelling units. Anything larger than that, of course, the fire department deems it imperative that we require the use of the fire sprinklers. In the exemption of this requirement to put in fire sprinklers, and at all the working sessions, Guam Fire Department was participating in those working sessions, and even at the public forum, and so was the Department of Public Works. These are the 2 departments that really are key to the permits that are issued to construct structures out there in the community. And the Guam Fire Department in particular has concurs with a recommendation to exempt these 1- and 2-story family homes and townhouses from the requirement for a water sprinklers. You'll find also, for example, like in Section 3, that we are adopting the International Building Code and some of the appendices, not all of the appendices. For example, you'll find in Section 3 that we are adopting the International Building Code, including only certain appendices. We did not include, for example, adoption of Appendix A, which deals with the qualifications of the building official and the inspectors. The group felt that that is something which the Department of Administration, we really need to sit down with them and discuss how the qualifications should be formulated. We did not adopt Appendix B, because that deals with creating an appeals board. That is something that the working group felt should be deferred for a later time. The other important feature of Bill 460, in addition to exempting the requirement for automatic fire sprinklers, is the requirement to create a task force that will look at developing a Guam Building Code Council, and that's in Section 15. And what Section 15 does is it mandates that the chairperson for the Legislative Committee with oversight for Public Works will convene a task force to propose the structuring of a Guam Building Codes Council. What this Guam Buildings Code Council will do is actually two things. First of all, it will serve as an appeals board. We have, during the course of the hearings, many concerns were raised about the fact that, for example, the developer comes in with his building plans, and he goes to the permit section, and the inspector at the permit section says, nope, these plans do not comply with the building codes. So where does the developer go? So the Guam Building Code Council, then we're looking at creating a council which then becomes that appeals body where the two entities can go to get the matter resolved and see then how the differences can be resolved. It will also serve a second purpose in that the International Building Code is updated every 3 years. But we don't want to necessarily adopt these changes automatically. We want to be able to review it, and we want to be able to determine, is this something that's appropriate? Is this something that complies with our building safety requirements here on Guam? And should we adopt it or not? So this building council, which will be comprised of representatives from the community, such as your contractors, professional engineers, and the public, and members from the public at large, will then be able to sit down and review these amendments, these updates, and make its recommendations to the legislature as to whether the new updates should be adopted. As you go through the bill, you'll find that there are a lot of sections that are being repealed. A lot of the repeals are actually more so house cleaning. For example, Section 2, it repeals Public Law 30-25, 30-84, 30-159. Those three laws were the three attempts that we've had to implement this IBC, the International Building Code. And we're just repealing that to kind of clean the books and say, let's start from here. Let's start with this Bill 460-30, and then we move on to where we want to get to. We'll find in section for example, in section 19, that is being repealed. That is being repealed because I believe section 66403 is the section which goes through how updates to the building code are to be adopted, which gives the director the authority to review it. If he thinks it should be adopted, he puts it through the AAA process and goes to the governor, it comes down to the legislature. The Building Code Council, which is being proposed to be created, will actually take on those functions. I think with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go ahead and leave it. I would just like to bring to everyone's attention at the public forum, DPW and the Guam Fire Department was one of the panelists, and they were there to answer two questions. First question was, has the work sessions been helpful and has been productive for their purposes in terms of coming up with recommendations in adoption of the building code? And to that, they answered in the affirmative that yes, it has. The second thing is the question of, do you have the resources to be able, on October 1st, to start receiving plans and start evaluating it based on the standards that are available in the IBC? To that, it was not a resounding yes from the standpoint that they do not have the hardbound books, all of the hardbound books that they have. But that really is not a showstopper, because there are copies available of all the international codes online. And I have provided back here, on the table back here, a website that one can go to and can take a look at everything you wanted to know about building standards, everything you wanted to know about the fire code, everything you wanted to know about the existing building codes. They're all in there. So to say that because we do not have the hardbound copy in hand is reason to delay implementation is just not true, because we do have it available online. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll go ahead and just ask my. I think we've had enough working sessions. We had good input from professionals. We did have an opportunity for a public forum for the public to come out, at which where only actually, aside from the people that had been participating in the working sessions, really only 2 other people showed up. One provided a written testimony, but really, other than that, the biggest objection that was raised in implementing the building code was the requirement for the fire sprinklers. I think we've met all the requirements. The director of DPW and Guam Fire Department, they were supposed to provide their recommendations to the legislature, but instead what they did was they did provide to the speaker their letters indicating their concurrence to the provisions of Bill 460, and I believe that would satisfy the requirement for them submitting their recommendations. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I see on the list, Senator Taitigui, are you prepared to go at this time? Otherwise, I can call Senator Palacios if you need to get some more information. Okay. All right. Senator Taitigui and then Senator Palacios.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the author of the bill who's worked so hard on this legislation to get through, and it's so definitely needed. I did attend the public hearings and listen to testimony as well as receiving some testimony. And the concerns that were brought up, of course, was number one, the fire sprinklers. And I saw that he did address this, and I commend him for that. The second one was the ability to have a council put in place to have the avenue in the event there is any concerns or any appeals brought up, or the construction of any new development that should come into play where the cost is substantially lower in any material and building of structures. So being that I'm very happy to see that the council has been included into this bill. But Mr. Speaker, Guam has been so resilient in its previous building codes. We have been able to have substantial amount of infrastructure in place that withstands typhoons and earthquakes that would basically flat other communities out, but not Guam. We've been very blessed and very lucky, that hasn't happened. My concern that I brought, I guess when the author was talking about a lot of questions, I was that one with a lot of questions. Most of them have been answered. My concern was the grandfather clause, in which he explained to me the current law and its statement of grandfathering in existing structures will continue on as it has done today. And that was answered. But there is a situation, and this I basically would be a question, if the good author would yield to a question I have.
Senator Atta, do you yield? Please, Senator Taitigui, pose your question.
This question basically is for the situation that may come about where in existence right now there is a development going on and the plans are being structured in and has been implemented and has been stamped and approved by the code, the permit given. And even though the interest rate is low out there, Mr. Speaker, the credit is not, for them to be able to get financing as quickly, even though it is low interest rates out there. So in the event we have what's a delay in funding these developments, let's say for circumstances as a development that costs $12 million, and then later on they find that they're still having difficult time in implementing that $12 million with a certain contractor, but yet they find somebody that says, okay, well, we can't do 12 million because the funding's not there. We do have 10 million. Now, in that circumstances, what happens is, do they have to go back and readjust the plans for that particular development because they needed to go back? Yet they have the permit for a development of $12 million, and then just to downsize a little bit, would they have to go back and redo their plans all over again based on the new code if it should come into play by October 1st?
I think the situation that the senator is asking, that specific situation is really kind of hard to answer, but I do know that if a set of plans came in today, it will be evaluated based on the Uniform Building Code, and will be then issued a permit. That permit, according to law, Guam law, is valid for, I believe, 90 days. So the understanding is that you're going to come in and you're going to apply for a permit with the understanding that you're going to get ready to start breaking ground in 90 days. again, I could only assume that, at that point when you come in to get that permit, you got your $12 million financing already. But, now the question, a different twist to that question that was asked earlier was, he got all his financing in, he came in to get his permit, that permit is good for 90 days. All of a sudden, on the 70th day, something happens that does not allow him to actually break ground. So then, are we now going to have to go back and reevaluate those plans based on the new codes? And the answer to that, that very question was asked in one of the working sessions, was that in our Guam law, and I can't find it right now, but in our Guam law, it does allow you to come in and get another extension of 90 days, provided you can give good justification. So there's those provisions in our Guam law, and it's interesting as we were actually going through the Guam building laws and whatnot. A lot of those situations were actually taken into account. So I hope that answers her question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for that. That brings me to another situation with the adoption of the 90 days. And I was hoping that the good author would consider extending that 90 days to the ability to still provide the flexibility with the UBC versus the International Building Code for that particular developer.
First of all, in the bill itself, I would direct you to, and I don't know if this would answer your question, but there's a transition period that is provided. And what that transition period does, if you just give me a minute to find it. What it does is that we implement the International Building Code. It becomes effective October 1st. But we also know that there may be, for example, plans that are being drawn up right now or were drawn up using the Uniform Building Code. And it gets hung up because of some protests, especially with a government project. It gets hung up, and so they can't actually, they don't finally untangle it until, let's say, November of this year. So what happens is that the bill provides for a transition period of 90 days, so that then between the period October and December, if a plan comes in, that both codes will actually be used as to evaluate a set of plans. So if a plan comes in during that period that was formulated using Uniform Building Code, it will be evaluated using the Uniform Building Code. If it came in and was formulated using the International Building Code standards, it will be evaluated using the International Building Code standards. After January, however, the only building code standard that will be used to evaluate a set of plans would be the International Building Code. And if you just give me a minute, I'll
it's
find
on page, it's on the 10th page.
Page 10?
Yeah, page 10. Effective date.
Okay, page 10, section 25, and it shows here that the effective date shall be October 1st, after which a transitional period shall be instituted where either the Uniform Building Code and the Uniform Fire Code, or the codes adopted in this act, which is the International Building Code, will be used as a standards for evaluation. But then after that 90 days, which is around December 29th, only the International Building Code will apply.
Well then, Mr. Speaker, then that being said, and recognizing that 90-day period, and also recognizing situations currently that are in development right now and at a larger scale, this is not the ones that are building homes or two apartment buildings or anything like that. These are larger developments. And 90 days is not very long when you're considering larger developments that are currently being brought into play right now, and financing, of course, being very difficult. So that being said, in the consideration of these and the quickness of it, October 1st is just coming up around the corner. We have to be considerate of those larger developments that are coming in and request to make an amendment with either one of the two, three, but I would like to take a short recess to discuss with the author, maybe a happy medium if we could.
Okay, why don't we just take a few minutes? We're in recess for about 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, considering the time period in most circumstances where plans have already been in place and larger development of these plans take a lot longer than 90 days, and plus some of them are probably about 3/4 of the way completed, but yet still need quite a bit of time. And October 1st being the implementation of the IBC code does not give quite a bit of those who are out there developing these projects enough time. So the 90-day grace period, it's still substantially very, limited to the type of projects being able to work on this, a 90-day period is smaller projects, but larger projects. So, Madam Speaker, my amendment basically is on page 10 to strike out the 90 days and put 1 year for the project submitted during. So on page 10, line 30, strike out 90 days and put 1 year. And that 1 year time will give the grace period needed for these larger constructions, which we are starting to see, and our own community being a part of and investing into the growth of our island in the next 4 years. Or actually, Madam Speaker, it's starting right now, and these plans have been put in place. So I put forth that amendment.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. On the amendment, I recognize Senator Tom Ada.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the amendment that's being made. First of all, let's bear in mind that we've delayed the implementation of the International Building Code for 4 times already. There was Public Law 30-25 that was passed in June of 2009, and that set the implementation date of December 2009. When we came close to December, it was realized that, oops, we're not ready to implement it. So then another bill was introduced, which became Public Law 30-84, which then moved the implementation date out to June 2010. As we came close to 2010, again it was realized, oops, we're not ready to implement it. So then another bill was introduced, and it became Public Law 30-159, and it again, once again, for the third time, moved out the implementation date to October 1st. But in Public Law 30-159, it did have a provision that there was going to be this transition period. Now, I really think it's going to probably, first of all, it's not necessary to have this extended period, because a question was asked that kind of got to the heart of, the idea about extending this transition period from 90 days to 360 days. And the question was asked, well, what happens if a developer or the engineer turns in his plans and he misses the window? So he comes in with a set of plans that was formulated using the Uniform Building Code standards, but he just missed the window, and he comes in on January or December or January 2nd, and he finally finishes it on January 2nd. He comes in to get a permit, and they'll probably turn him around and they say no, because this plans does not comply with the International Building Code. So the question was asked, does that mean then I have to throw out these plans and start all over again? And the answer to that was no. Because in essence, really a lot of the standards that you would find in the Uniform Building Code are still pretty much in place. But the International Building Code may have tightened up a few things, and it's just a matter of going back and making adjustments. I know that there was a developer that was telling his horror story about how his plans were already finished, and it was formulated using the Uniform Building Code. And when when it was realized that, oops, we're probably going to need to change it to the International Building Code, his designer, his engineer told him it's going to cost you $500,000 for me to convert it so that it complies to the IBC. So when that story was told to some of the other more credible engineers in the community, they kind of looked at each other and says, well, who was your engineer? So he told them the name, and they just says, well, that's why he charged you $500,000 to revamp your, he was just taking you for a ride. But they didn't think that having to change those plans to conform to the IBC was really going to be that expensive. The concern that I have about now just stretching it out to 360 days is that, remember that the building codes, really the sole purpose of the building codes is to provide the minimum standards that's necessary to construct safe buildings that would ensure the safety of the public out there when they're inside the buildings. And so to allow then for the next year to continue building using standards that are already really outdated, that have been superseded by the international building codes, is we're just tolerating this inferiority even further. And I think at some point we got to say we want to build safe buildings out there. So now the 90 days, I didn't pick that out of the air. That was basically a consensus amongst the professionals that were in that working group, who felt that really 90 days should be a sufficient transition time. So, Madam Speaker, I would have to object to the amendment and would urge my colleagues to maintain the transition period of 90 days.
On the amendment, are there any speakers? Senator Tenorio, then Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I understand and I listened to the good argument just from the immediate retiring speaker. But the concern I have was actually about the implementation date. The flex time that has been given, maybe a year, clearly I think that's more than adequate. But I think perhaps the actual effective date was what I was looking at more, implementing at a later time, because we're right on the cusp of October 1. We're literally right on top of it. And I understand, of course, there's been a lot of history, there's been a lot of delays in this, but there's also been a lot of changes. And the changes that are effective here, perhaps those industry professionals and stakeholders, developers, may need to get their heads around it. And I was actually looking more at an effective date of October or January 1, because we're in the time that it takes for us to pass this bill, transmit it to the governor, for them to review it, and then obtain input on the recommendations, then finally for the governor to take action on it. You may have a week before the actual effective date of this bill. And again, with the changes that have been made, I would like to actually see a January 1 effective date, but that's not the content of this amendment. But in lieu of that, I can understand where the move of the amendment is going, and therefore rise in support of it. But I'd rather actually see an effective date of January 1, because I think that's a little bit more flexibility, and I'd rather err on the side of caution by giving the people who are already part of this conversation the opportunity to have 2-3 months lead time to make sure that they understand all of the things that are contained within this bill, and make sure they make it part of the new International Building Code as it applies to Guam, and as we've allowed for exceptions, but as of January 1 as opposed to October 1, again, for the reasons I articulated. So I do stand in support of the amendment in absence of the January 1 one, but that would be rather where I'd rather go, is the effective date of January 1 with the 90-day flex period rather than the October 1. But again, I do stand in support because I appreciate the sentiments being placed by the mover. Thank you.
On the amendment, Senator Pangilinan.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm really not, I don't really know what is the right date or a number of days to effectuate a smooth transition. We have postponed the implementation of the IBC because we collectively failed to take a look at the contents of the IBC, the changes that will occur with the adoption of the IBC on a wholesale basis that takes us from a 1994 Uniform Building Code to a 2010 International Building Code. And this metamorphosis into UBC to IBC is basically a reorganization maybe of the building code officials across the country. From what I read in the legislative intent, you used to have the Southern Building Code officials, the Uniform Building Code officials in the eastern or western part of the states, and so forth. I thought that when we were looking at the International Building Code, I really thought it was worldwide international. I'm still not sure that when we say IBC, that we are in fact joining the rest of the world, or are we just joining the rest of the United States? And so even that I'm still confused. I always thought, or I initially thought, that when we transition from the Uniform Building Code to the International Building Code, we're transitioning from a stateside, that Western building practices to a worldwide European as well as Asian building practices. And if we look at some of the building practices in Asia, maybe that's not where we want to go. So this transition period is something that to me kind of makes sense. You know, I responded to some of the concerns that we've seen come across our correspondence, both in email and in hard copy, as to what are we doing with regards to moving from the UBC to the IBC and the adoption of the code on a wholesale basis. And do we understand them? And, you know, my response was, you know, I take full responsibility for my actions in supporting moving forward on this in the transitions and every other bill that has said we're going to postpone and try to do this and try to do that. I take full responsibility for being part of this uncertainty. But one of the things I did in all this was I did it without having an international building code available to even look at or peruse even the title and the content on my own. I relied on every other expert that had come before this body telling me this was the right thing to do. And then when we kind of, you know, I strayed away from the principle of the devil's in the details, and I never took a look at any portion of the details, then one single detail that we overlooked on an issue, for example, on this requirement for sprinklers in homes or underground garage, was one detail that I never even, you know, looked at and saw. And even as I look at the chart here that's been given that shows what is being changed and what is new with regards to the 2009 IBC, the 1994 UBC, what I see a lot is that we've taken this section of the UBC and we put it in this section of the IBC. I don't see even a lot of the details of what is really going to change in the construction practices, the safety requirements that affect the actual development of the plans and the construction of the buildings and its impact on the cost associated with implementing those. I don't see that, and even in the testimony, I don't see that kind of detail. So, you know, one of the things that has occurred in the IBC itself is that when new changes are being proposed, for example, they go to this council, and the council takes a look at what's being proposed, I guess sends it out to all its members or all the jurisdictions that may be part of the International Building Code Council or International Building Council, and they get their input, they come back, they ferret it out, they vet it, they take a look at what's happening, And the adoption of that change takes over a year, 18 months, and then it gets voted on by this association that is not any official government body. It's an association of building permits or building officials, from what I understand, that is outside of any government entity, governmental authority. And it is by maybe the virtue of we become members of the International Building Council that we decide to adopt those practices as being good and relevant to the living conditions and the building conditions and the environmental conditions for our community, that if we build things in this manner under these specifications, we will ensure the health and safety of our residents in our community that occupies these buildings. So, again, in a roundabout way, I think that, maybe the postponement is not, it shouldn't be a 2-month postponement, 3-month postponement, 4 months postponement, because we found 1 or 2 details, 3 or 4 details, and we go back and we take those details out and said, okay, we don't agree to this. Maybe we need the same kind of vetting process, the same kind of timelines that the International Building Council itself takes in order to adopt changes to already adopted standards and practices and specifications. And we should actually take a look at all of these details and then make the decision to what to adopt and what not to adopt. I do realize and see that, we are adopting even some of the appendices. Some we're not, some we are. And again, these are the same experts that came to this body and said, everything's okay, let's just go this way. And then when something was pointed out to them as being in the detail, they said, well, that really would not have been relevant to Guam anyway. And actually, I agree with those. I think, there was some people got affected by the change, legitimately so, because the decision was by this body to hold them to that standard in construction. And even though it doesn't make sense that you would apply that standard and hold the developer or the homeowner to that standard, it wouldn't have made sense. That you could probably have argued your way out of it. It still was the law that we had to follow, and absent a change in the law, then the building officials may have no option but to apply that standard. And so, again, I'm a little hesitant because I look at what has been proposed, and I still don't know enough of the details. And maybe it is a good thing that we have, a longer period. And it's not that we give these developers time to rush in or time to develop their plans and get in under the old building code, that the additional length of time may be for us as a community, as a government, to take a look at those devils in those details and make a conscious decision that we actually take a look at all of those details. And I know some people are going to say, but it's, 2,000, 3,000 pages. Well, then maybe we should give it to We Are Guahan, because they've had practice in going through 10,000 pages, and even some of us have done that. But again, it's just that kind of combing through every single area of the building code, because even those experts who we relied upon, who said they've worked with it, who say they practice it, who say they've designed buildings in the States on it, and who came over here, didn't even tell us that detail that, hey, you better watch out for all those fireplaces you're building in your homes, because you're going to need to vent them, or you're going to need to provide a sprinkler. Even those experts didn't tell us about that detail that somebody else did, because it was in their interest, or it was part of their process of finalizing their documents, and they pointed that out to us. So I realize that we do have the benefit of some of these experts, but, again, it's those details still bother me. The fact that I've taken a little bit of time to get a little bit more up to speed on the changes that are being proposed. But I think there's still, to me, too many details that I haven't looked at to feel totally comfortable with moving forward wholesale in adoption and piecemeal in the exemptions. So I do realize and want to commend the work that's gone into this, because it hasn't been easy and it has been a long time. But in every instance where we've decided and placed it before this body, none of us looked at that detail. I don't believe so. At least I didn't. And I don't know if I want to go that same road down there again. In the 29th, when we adopted it, we did the same way. We're going to do it wholesale, and we'll take care of the details later on. And we didn't. And somebody brought to our attention. And so, again, I understand and I fully understand what the author is looking at, but I think the author is looking at this from a different perspective than I am with regards to the implementation date. She, I think, is looking at it from the side of the developer, that the developer be given the time to complete their plans and have an adequate time to submit it, within 1 year and get in under the wire of not having the new code applied to them. I'm looking at taking the time to just decide which portions of the new code, even more so and in more detail than we have in this bill, of what should be applicable to Guam, and try to get all of those details ferreted out. Again, I just wanted to present that perspective from what I've been able to gather and the additional, but still very limited review and analysis I've been able to perform in what is being proposed today. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan. On the amendment, anybody else like to speak? There being none, the author, you may close. The mover of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I still once again like to commend the author of this bill and all the work he's went into it, the frustration of trying to adhere to some and make everything work for the best of everybody, and most especially for the safety of our island. Madam Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, that the building code that we currently use has a lot of safety mechanisms in there, standards that are used, that have been used for years. Typhoons, earthquakes, as I mentioned, have flattened most countries, but we have been resilient. They have stood up with one exception. But Madam Speaker, I ask that my colleagues please consider this in every perspective on the the speakers who spoke before me with regards to the intent of this, the true intent of this amendment. And as the good author mentioned earlier, that the gentleman, a well-renowned architect on island, stated himself that the delay in this would really have no bearing at all, because they're currently using it. So that's good for those who are currently using it. But some still have not had that opportunity and have plans in place right now, Madam Speaker, and much funding and money has been put into those plans to give them an opportunity that they can move forward because of lack of the ability to get more investors or whatever the case may be. I mean, the climate in the financial world right now, the way we're standing. But I ask my colleagues to please to support my amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Since there is an objection, I'm going to call for the vote. So those in favor of Senator Taitigui's amendment on page 10, line 30, to delete 90 days and to replace it with 1 year. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. On the motion, I have Senator Palacios.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. I attended at least one evening session with the major players with respect to these IBC codes here at the legislature, and then last Friday the committee's markup. Everyone was involved, the architects, the planners, engineers, developers. We heard them. We have enough information to be able to make a decision, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one of the strengths of this bill is the creation of what is called the Guam Building Code Council that will begin to monitor, of course, because this code, it is recognized that this is not a perfect code, but it is an improvement. And this council will, of course, continue to monitor this, review this, make recommendations to this legislature for adjustments or improvements and so forth. And this, of course, this council will be comprised of even government regulatory officials, more importantly, the public works officials and the fire department officials. There will be adjustments needed, enforcements. Those are the implications. Madam Speaker, this legislature tried to implement these codes, and there's been postponement, extension. I like to say that if we are not ready now, after all this postponement and after all these discussions, there's really no new additional information that will really make any difference. If this is not passed in this term, I really doubt that it would next term, as there would be new members. Definitely there will be new members of these bodies. They would need time. All of us, we have heard this. We have went through it the last 2 years. We are more ready. This legislature, 30th Guam Legislature, is more ready than the 31st Guam Legislature to take this on. So if this doesn't pass, then definitely there would be postponement next year, and then what? And then another year. Then there will never be an IBC code implemented. I am ready. I've heard enough. I've read enough. And again, the safeguard here is that there's a council there to continue to guide us, to guide the legislature as we move ahead in the implementation. There's no additional cost. The plans that have been approved, by the way, they're not thrown away upon the implementation of the IBC. There is the extension. If a plan is approved 2 years ago, but because the financial condition of the investors have declined, those plans, as long as the extension has been approved by 6 months at a time, remain valid, notwithstanding that the IBC code now takes into effect. But plans approved under the UBC will continue to be valid as long as the extension has been granted. That's been pointed out. So all these myths and notions that these all go to waste, it's just a myth. It's just I think misinformation at the minimum. And I believe that the information is enough that's been provided to this body, and I rise in support. Again, this would not be the 100% perfect documents, but it is an improvement from where we are, and there is really very, very little risk of any setback or any disadvantage to anybody. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Palacios. On the motion, Senator BJ, Vice Speaker? Oh, you're not? Okay, Senator Espadon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too rise in support of this bill. We've been working on this, adopting the International Building Code, and in fact, it was passed about 2 years ago, a little under 2 years ago. And since then, yes, there have been problems, perhaps because we have not been able to, or at least the agency or the department who was charged with the responsibility for vetting out all the sections of the International Building Code, to vet out all the sections that are non-applicable to Guam, had not been made. And that's really been the real problem behind all this. The intent when we first passed the International Building Code bill was to have just that happen, that there would be a certain department or agency that would look at the IBC, tell us what was relevant, take out everything that was not relevant, and we move forward from there. However, because of either manpower constraints or perhaps funding constraints or whatever reason, it just did not happen. And that's why we do have to commend the author of this for doing all the good work that was really charged to an agency or a department, because now we have in place, we have had meetings and forums in place in which a lot of those non-applicable sections to the code have been vetted out, and that's exactly what this bill does. Going forward, we also have to understand that many of the engineering projects that are happening right now that are basically done by firms based out of the United States are actually all being done in accordance with the IBC, since that is since the IBC is the standard across all 50 states and jurisdictions. And we also must consider that all the continuing education programs that the engineers and architects go through basically are to update them in terms of what is required by the IBC and how their designs and how their planning basically should be in conformity with the new standards. Actually, not even new. They're more than a decade old. What these standards entail and how the architects and engineers can actually use these codes to the better development of these buildings. And that's all that's really being discussed in this bill. And we just basically are now saying, okay, we have identified through these forums and through these public discussions the areas within the International Building Code that no longer apply. Now, in terms of the UBC, I think we all have to make sure we understand that many parts of the UBC were actually adopted into the IBC, the International Building Code. And yes, the good senator, our good friend from Barrigada, definitely is right. I mean, it's almost like a misnomer to call it the International Building Code, because that's not what it is. This is a building code that's really pertinent only to the United States. But again, it is a standard by which they came up with. And this was actually formed after, I believe, I think it was Hurricane Andrew devastated Florida back whenever that happened, a decade or more ago. And they realized the weakness of the building codes that the United States had. And so really this is an update, and also incorporates a lot of the new building practices to include the technology for energy efficiencies, for strengthening some of the buildings, for earthquakes and even that, because a lot of new technology, a lot of new studies and engineering studies have come forward with new designs that would be able to withstand these kind of natural catastrophes that do occur worldwide. So this is really, the IBC is not a foreign concept, because it does incorporate a lot of the Uniform Building Code in it. It just really updates it to new modern practices. And like I said, we can't forget that now a lot of the engineers, our own engineers who are training abroad, are coming back with the knowledge and the education based upon the International Building Code. With that, I also want to commend the author for including the council, that whole concept of council, to constantly review and update and take a look at the code, because there is also that possibility where many other jurisdictions have adopted the IBC, but have also put in their own 2 cents in what they felt was applicable to their own jurisdictions and what they would like to see. So it is really basically the reference point of which our whole engineering and architect community can then build upon. And if there are any other concepts that our engineers and architects would like to incorporate that are pertinent to our island, then they have definitely the flexibility to do so. And this is where that council definitely would come in very handily. But with that, Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of Bill 460, and I commend the author, Senator Atta, for all the work that he's done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Espaldon. On the motion? None. Therefore, I'm going to ask the author if you would like to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for the input that they've given on the discussion on this bill. I particularly want to also extend my appreciation to Senator Spaldon, who's the second co-sponsor on the bill, because he was really been the one that's been in the forefront that was trying to get this thing out of the starting gate so that we can move towards the full implementation of the International Building Code. The remarks by the gentleman from Barrigada about wanting to vet the new building code even more so we can really take a look at the details certainly is a very valid concern. But then in my mind it becomes a question of, do we do that first or do we get into the building code and actually, according to the bill, establish that Guam Building Code Council so that that group will actually sit down and go through our existing, the laws that we have to see how we might change that. For example, in our current laws right now, the fees that's charged for the building permit is based on the valuation of the building. So for example, if I'm going to do a renovation on a $500,000 home, the valuation of that home is based on the appraisal that's made by the inspector. That is probably, now I don't know if our inspectors are trained to do appraisals, but that is certainly something that the Building Code Council can actually get into the details of. So not just to review the new updates that come in, but to actually take a look at what's in the books right now and possibly update them or delete them as appropriate. So certainly that concern is very valid, but I think that the creation of the Building Code Council will actually allow that sort of detailed vetting to actually happen. I believe that there's also my insistence on, let's go with the implementation date of October 1st. Let's have a 90-day transition period. It's really basically driven by the fact that until we get out of the starting gate, we're never going to start that learning curve to find out where the weaknesses are and what do we need to rectify so that we in fact have a good building code here on Guam, and going through the IBC to see really what should be modified for Guam's needs. So I ask my colleagues to please support the bill so that we can bring current our building codes that would promote the construction of safe structures out in our community. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Adat. So on the motion then to place bill number 460 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. We have on the next is the resolution. I'd like to ask the Vice Speaker whether he wants to proceed with resolution 420 or do you want to do that tomorrow? You want to do it for tomorrow because we have another public hearing tonight. Okay. Where's the majority leader? 1 minute recess.
That's probably why. Well, let's vote so that they can come tomorrow to session and participate.
Legislature's back in session. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we dispense any further discussion in the second reading file and proceed to the voting file to take up the matter of Bill 460-30. There's been a request by the sponsor that we vote on this bill today and to vote without engrossment.
With not just 460, but 427 and 460?
Oh, yeah, 427 and 460, to vote on both bills without engrossment.
Okay, on that motion, without any objections, so ordered. Okay, so we are in the voting file, and I'll ask the clerk if she can please read the title of bill number 427-30.
Bill number 427-30 COR, introduced by T.C. Ada, an act to appropriate $454,151 of the Guam Highway Fund to the Guam Regional Transit Authority for the purpose of carrying out its mandate.
Roll call. Senator T.C. Ada. Yes. Senator V.A. Ada. Yes. Senator Uggan. Senator Blas. Yes. Senator Calvo. Senator Cruz. Aye. Senator Espaldon. Yes. Senator Gutherds. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Respicio. Senator Tidegui. Senator Tenorio. Speaker Wampet. Bill number 427-30 received 13 yea votes and 2 excused absence. Bill number 427 is duly passed by this body. Bill number 460-30.
Bill number 460-30 COR, introduced by T.C. Ada, J.V. Espaldon, A.B. Palacios Sr., R.J. Respicio, an act to ratify the adoption of the 2009 editions of the International Building Code, International Fire Code, and additional related construction codes as amended, and to provide for a task force to develop a new Guam Building Code Council.
Roll call. Senator T.C. Ada. Yes. Senator V.A. Ada. Yes. Senator Uggan. Senator Blas. Yes. Senator Calvo. Senator Cruz. Aye. Senator Espaldon. Yes. Senator Gutherds. Yes. Senator Munya Barnes. Yes. Senator Palacios. Yes. Senator Pangilinan. Aye. Senator Respicio. Senator Tidegui. Senator Tenorio. Speaker Wampet. Senator Tidegui. Bill number 460-30 received 12 yea votes, 1 nay, and 2 excused absence. Bill number 460 is duly passed by this body.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we revert back to the second reading file.
Without any objections, so ordered. Okay. And since we have a public hearing, this evening. We will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.